Alright, what's up everybody? So you can imagine how much I was caught off guard last Monday when we appear to have gotten our very first tease at the next Uncharted game. The first thought that honestly popped up into my mind then was like, man, I really regret that I make these videos on Sunday, because I'm gonna have to wait quite a while to talk about it, but obviously, PlayStation released a particular ad that is now being broadcasted. I even, saw it on TV in my living room downstairs. It's being broadcasted around the whole world. PlayStation 5s are finally back in stock. And so they came up with this concept live from PS5, as it is called. The advertisement is a minute long, basically shows all kinds of news reports from around the globe, with particular PlayStation franchises and characters popping up in all kinds of places. And it's a funny little idea, I guess. Apparently in the real world they also actually placed some of these props, so you can see Kratos' Leviathan axe somewhere in London, I think it was. A couple other things, like a massive PlayStation 5 in itself, but that's all besides the point. The thing is that this ad focused on a couple of specific franchises, big ones that are, kind of synonymous with the PlayStation brand, I guess. And yeah, I mean, the first thing that stands out is just a couple of frames where we see a clear reference to the Uncharted games. Not only that, the character who we see right in the middle of the screen there, representing the franchise, is a mysterious, unknown young woman. She's wearing a scarf, has a torch in her hand, she's wearing a backpack with a rope attached to it, and is blowing the dust off of a particular artifact. Obviously, it's a treasure hunting game, and I mean, anybody who knows about the Uncharted series at this point is well aware that the biggest, likely possibility that we've all been speculating about for the next Uncharted game is that we would be seeing Nathan Drake's daughter Cassie in the lead, and this is very much a character who could be representing her. Now, I think it's honestly a very clever way of potentially foreshadowing Cassie as that main lead for the series in the future. You avoid that too many people get caught by surprise when they do see the inevitable announcement of this game and, might not have expected this to be the direction that it was heading into. We, as the hardcore Uncharted fans, clearly know that this is a likely possibility, as I just mentioned. But it's also just the fact that we recently, for example, saw God of War do it, where I think that with the playable Atreus sections, they weren't only a great way to spice up the gameplay, but they made us comfortable with the concept of playing as Atreus in a God of War game, where now there is absolutely a potential scenario where a next God of War spin-off game or something has him in the lead, going off to set those last giants free together with Angerboda, as I talked about in a video very recently. Unfortunately, as much as I think it is completely obvious that what we saw here in this ad was at least a reference to the Uncharted games, there were also a bunch of people who simply didn't believe that, and they all had their own reasons as to why. For example, one of the reasons that I've seen mentioned is that some people believe that this could also be a reference to the Tomb Raider games. However, it is absolutely clear that this is not Lara Croft we're looking at. This is a young blonde woman who doesn't look anything like Lara Croft. On top of that, this ad also clearly only showed PlayStation-related games, either exclusives or some third-party games that had, in one way or another, a specific deal with PlayStation in the past. That being said, we know the next Tomb Raider game is published by Amazon Studios. While it is absolutely happening and the rumors are already floating around everywhere, it's going to be developed by Crystal Dynamics, it's going to be published by Amazon Studios, they officially announced it themselves. It won't in any way have a connection to the PlayStation platform. I also saw the idea floating around that this could just be an Uncharted reference that was at the same time showing you, let's say, quote-unquote, the player going on an adventure here as more of an indirect reference in that way. However, the physical resemblances to Cassie Drake are obvious. She looks exactly how Cassie would look a couple years into the future, post Uncharted 4. And at the same time, for all the other games, they focused on main characters. For Horizon, we saw Aloy. For God of War, we saw Kratos and Atreus. For Spider-Man, we saw him in a suit, and Ratchet & Clank, they weren't shying away from either. All these games showed us their actual lead characters, so there would be no reason to assume that what we're seeing here related to Uncharted wouldn't be its main character all at the same time. And so for as much as I myself was completely caught surprised by this, and I immediately could tell holy shit, they're actually teasing Cassie Drake here. It's unfortunate that you just run into people who don't seem to understand how big of a deal what's being shown actually is. Yeah, and also some that, seem to have some trouble, let's say, with reading comprehension, where perhaps the thing I've seen thrown around the most is people saying, well, Naughty Dog literally just confirmed Uncharted is done. That was an article that came out a couple of weeks ago, for which I immediately got a bunch of comments on my recent video talking about the future of Uncharted, from about a month or two ago, I think, saying that it had apparently aged like milk, all those kinds of things. And to me, it's like, I honestly just despise that about social media, how, not only gaming sites sort of run with those headlines, but people only read those headlines at the same time either, and therefore walk away from news with the complete wrong impression of what was actually being said. Because the thing that Neil Druckmann had indicated in an interview recently, while he was talking about all kinds of things, including the Last of Us HBO show, the future of that franchise, here's exactly what he said. He said, for us, Uncharted was insanely successful. Uncharted 4 was one of our best-selling games, and we were able to put our final brushstroke on that story and say that we're done. We're moving on. Game websites picked up on that, and while some did accurately, I guess, report on it by saying Naughty Dog is moving on from Uncharted, others ran more with sort of the headline of, oh, Uncharted has truly come to an end. But that's clearly not what Neil Druckmann is saying. All that he's saying is that Naughty Dog is moving on from the franchise. Well, guess what? We've known that for years, literally. In fact, I've made a couple of videos in the past now talking about all the information that we've known so far, and in every single one of them, I've been at the forefront telling you all that the next Uncharted game will not be made by them. We've known for the longest that it's most likely a different studio that's going to be at the helm of the project, and there's been a couple of already clear, almost pieces of evidence pointing us at the fact that it's going to happen. I don't want to regurgitate a bunch of the same information that I constantly do, but of course, it's not only the job reports that have come out of Visual Arts Service Group, where they say they are working on a next game. This is the team that, of course, basically worked on the Last of Us Part 1 remake early on until Naughty Dog took it over at a bit of a later point, saying that their next game is also gonna have some oversight from Naughty Dog. They're working in collaboration with them, but of course that doesn't mean that Naughty Dog is mainly responsible for whatever that project is. They could simply be overseeing the project. However, the biggest piece of evidence easily remains Jason Schreier's article from back in 2021, where he flat out confirmed that PlayStation was working on some kind of future for the franchise, with initially Sony Bend leading development for that project. Sony Bend asked to be taken off the project specifically because they were afraid that this means that, their future was essentially just making Uncharted games now and becoming seemingly Naughty Dog's little brother, to put it like that. Again, it is clear-cut evidence, though, that PlayStation is putting other studios in charge of the Uncharted series moving forward. They are just simply right now seeking out which one will be the right candidate for that job. Say what you want about Jason Schreier, I personally don't like the guy, but if I ever had to give him credit for anything, it's that he's always right when it comes to his inside information. He always ends up leaking games early in advance, has his inside sources. The guy is as credible as they come. And so whatever he says, I will believe it 100%. I completely believe that Sony Bend, of course, after not deciding to continue with Days Gone, were put in charge of that Uncharted game for a while there until they realized that Sony had a much larger plan, I guess, with this Uncharted series in mind than just this one game alone, and therefore realized that, oh, if we're making this next game, it means we'll have to be making all the sequels that come after that one too. And they simply wanted to have that independence, to have their own franchise that they could work on. And while that's not going to be Days Gone, right now it seems like they, Jason Schreier said they got their wish, I think, back in March of 2021, were taken off of the Uncharted game, and are now working on a whole new IP that they hope to basically become their massive staple franchise moving forward. Now, that's the thing, and it's what you've already heard me talk about in the past. The biggest question at this moment in time remains, what's going to be the studio leading that Uncharted game then? Is it Visual Arts Service Group, which, I will say, don't seem a team large enough to truly be helming a project like this. Now, of course, PlayStation could be seeking to add a whole bunch of people to that particular team from wherever they can find them. And so we simply don't know. There is another studio that I guess I haven't really brought up in the past before that I could totally see being involved with this game, and that's actually Bluepoint. I realized when doing some research that Bluepoint was acquired in September 2021, which is interesting because it's actually 6 months after Jason Schreier had indicated that Bend was taken off of the Uncharted project. Bluepoint itself also said in an interview when they were acquired that it's working on quote-unquote original content, which I think people at the time assumed like, oh, so that means they're working on a new IP, I guess, right? A franchise of their own, finally moving on from only doing those, I mean, fantastic remasters and remakes as they have been doing for the past decade or so. But it actually remains completely unclear what that original content means. That could be a new IP, but it could certainly also be a new game in an existing franchise that would still be original content at the same time. Something brand new, right? Uncharted would certainly be a major step for them. I will say that. You know, Bluepoint Games, while they have absolutely proven themselves in the past, and they have worked their way up to become one of my personal favorite studios with those fantastic remakes of especially Shadow of the Colossus and Demon's Souls recently, right? Yeah, is truly being put in charge of like the future of Uncharted. Is that perhaps a step too far? It could be, but you don't know. PlayStation could be combining, you know, they could be of course adding to Bluepoint now that they have acquired them and they're trying to have them grow in rapid time, I guess. They could be having them collaborate with that visual art service group. They could be kind of putting a bunch of teams together to work on this thing and hopefully see something organic evolve from that, like one massive studio or team or whatever that could be that could be leading the future of Uncharted moving forward. It's absolutely a major step, like I said, but I wouldn't rule it out at the same time. Other than Naughty Dog, there are only 2 studios that have a history with the Uncharted series. That is, of course, Sony Bend, who made Uncharted Golden Abyss, but it is also Bluepoint Games, who did Uncharted the Nathan Drake collection. So from a technical perspective, I have no doubt in my mind that they would be nailing it. I think Bluepoint has already proven themselves basically time and time again now for the past, like I said, 5 to 10 years. But at the same time, a big question does remain, okay, who would be creatively in charge, right? I mean, who would be the next Amy Hennig, the next Neil Druckmann, the next person that's actually gonna be responsible for the direction for where the story is going to go and what they're going to do with all the characters. There were a couple of people, I guess more behind the scenes, who also played big parts in the writing for the Uncharted games. Many of them, though, also right now are gone, working at completely different studios. Like, for example, Josh Schur, who I saw moved on from Naughty Dog, and I had totally seen in the past as like somebody they would take and ask to help work on that future for Uncharted. There's people like Sean Eskai as well, who I think did The Lost Legacy, but he's still working at Naughty Dog, it seems. So I truly don't know, and that's the thing. I think you're always going to have at least one leader figure, who has a vision for that series. And again, right now, that remains my personal biggest question. It's like, I don't so much have too much doubt in the studio that they're gonna put on this game. I know PlayStation has a bunch of talent, and like I said, studios like Bluepoint have already proven themselves that they can handle this from a technical point of view, I think. But, obviously Uncharted is a franchise that remains very near and dear to me, not just for how great of games they actually are, how fantastic the gameplay and the environments and the level design is, but it's especially the story. It is the characters. It is that aspect that you care about so much, right? That you feel a connection towards. And I think that's the part that's definitely going to be a lot harder to nail, with the next game. So you're putting yourself up to quite a task is all that I mean to say. And I'm very curious to see what we're going to hear in that particular regard. As someone who's been closely following this franchise for the last 15 years at this point in time, it's absolutely crazy to realize. And you all know how connected I, myself, on a personal level, feel to the Uncharted games. I don't know if, Uncharted will ever feel the same again. I was very recently, I just stumbled across, I think, Retro Replay. Well, that's what the channel was called at the time, but they're Uncharted playthroughs that they did a couple years back, I think, right? And I don't know, it was so nice to just see people like Nolan North and Emily Rose, Richard McGonigal, but also Amy Hennig there, actually talking about how they made those original games, right? And the passion that you could clearly see on their faces. Just like, I look at those actors and those people involved, and I see Uncharted's identity, if you know what I mean. And it's also that realization that hits me that, like, this is always what Uncharted was to me, right? And moving forward, knowing whatever the next Uncharted game is going to be and what the direction will be that they'll take the franchise in, I don't know if Uncharted will ever feel the same again. It's why I've myself had all those double feelings that I've expressed, you know, time and time again, where I don't know if I want Uncharted to be continued. I want to make that very clear, but at the same time, I'm a realist. I know it's going to happen. I feel like it's you know, I just have to point that out to people and prepare them for it at the same time, because a lot of people do kind of seem to be in denial about it. This is easily one of PlayStation's basically top 3, top 5 franchises that they have. We know that they're so focused on the big IP, let's say, trying to build those out. We've seen the Uncharted movie, we've seen the Legacy of Thieves collection. Again, we see here Cassie being teased in this ad. It's happening, and right now it's just a matter of time. It's not a question of, you know, if it's going to happen, but when at this point. So the last topic of conversation that I guess that brings me to talk about, and it's something that I honestly want your input about too, because it's very hard to speculate about these kinds of things before you, I guess, really see it for yourselves. But it's, again, what will they do with that particular game from a story perspective, right? I mean, with Cassie in the lead, which, don't get me wrong, is something that I'm absolutely open-minded towards, what else are they going to do with it? How is Uncharted still going to remain to have its own, you know, I guess that familiar identity, right? Or is it going to feel like something else entirely? I truly do believe it would be a major mistake if next to Cassie, you would be, you know, I don't know, putting a bunch of new friends that you might have in the mix. It's, I don't know, I just really don't see that idea working. I think you have to, in some way or another, still take some of those characters that we know and love and make them part of this, right? So we know that, I guess, talking about the next generation idea, Uncharted 4 already gave us a couple, let's say, next-generation characters for the future of the series, with, for example, Nadine, with Chloe, of course, who were both our protagonists in The Lost Legacy, Sam at the same time, too, who still continues to go on with his, let's say, treasure hunting hobbies. So, knowing that Sam was kind of a well, I wouldn't say a father figure, because that was Drake himself, of course, but we've seen those pictures even in the epilogue where Cassie was spending a lot of time with Sam, for example, too, right? And she made like a fun remark about him. You can totally see Sam and Chloe, perhaps Nadine, accompanying Cassie potentially in the next game. At the same time, I still don't think that's it's not enough of a selling point, I think, to the real, yeah, I don't know, the mainstream audience who still thinks that Uncharted is synonymous with Nathan Drake, if you'd ask me, and we saw it in the sales figures for The Lost Legacy, which, while still good, was significantly worse than a game like Uncharted 4 performed. Therefore, I have no doubt in my mind that Nathan Drake will be in this game, but the question is, in what way? Is it going to be sort of a cameo role where we only see him pop up in the final cutscene for the game or something like that? Is it gonna be that he himself gets to have the Sully role, let's say, where he's accompanying Cassie, and we get that kind of scenario, which, you know, I think I've brought up in the past, where, I don't know, either it's gonna have to be some kind of rescue mission, or the two will somehow be forced to, yeah, I don't know, like forced into a certain relatively dark situation that they can't get out of without being forced to shoot their way through, I guess. Is Nathan Drake himself going to be playable for a portion of the game? I feel like it's almost mandatory if you want Uncharted to have that staying power, if you want Uncharted to immediately get that old, let's say, player base, which is not just the hardcore, the people like you and I who would be, you know, probably checking this game out regardless because of the connection that we feel to the series. You know, like the mainstream audience is it's gonna take some more convincing for them to want to pick it up, I think, and Nathan Drake is the way that you would be doing that. It's also why we saw that the Uncharted movie had to feature him, of course, which I wasn't fond of in the slightest, but that being said, I truly think that Cassie needs to earn her spot as protagonist of the series. It can't just happen with the snap of a finger like that, where we saw her in the epilogue and, oh, now we have the next game's playing as her, and we're never really gonna hear from the other characters again, apart from a couple of perhaps scenes here and there, because of course, I mean, it's literally inescapable to still see Drake and Elena featured in some kind of way, seeing as, I mean, they're literally her parents, of course, but again, they can't just leave them behind that easily, I'd say, and so you need to have some kind of smooth transition, where I can only imagine it would be Cassie being protagonist of that game, but still having Drake for a significant portion of the game be present in some kind of way, where you feel like, okay, you might literally see Drake passing the torch onto her, if you get what I'm saying. So, yeah, all in all, guys, I mean, it's gonna be an interesting, I don't know, an interesting time ahead. I am very curious to see when, for the first time, we will truly get to hear something official out of this. But for now, of course, let me know in the comments how you feel about it, people. What do you, first and foremost, think about this particular ad? Do you think it's a direct reference like I do? And what do you think it's trying to get us ready for? How do you feel still right now about the potential, I guess, possibility of a next Uncharted game with Cassie in the lead role? What direction do you want the franchise to be headed in? Or are you still completely not on board? And do you simply think this is something they should let rest? Yeah, I might have some bad news for you if that's the case. But with that being said, I want to thank you all a lot for tuning in. Of course, make sure that you hit the like button on the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell, as I'll be continuing to bring you updates on gaming news and my takes on a weekly basis here. And then with that being said, I want to thank you all a lot for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you back in the next video.